Hey there, restaurant recipe lovers. Welcome back to The Daily Dish, a Copycat.com podcast where I help you recreate your favorite dishes right in your own kitchen. I'm Stephanie Manley, and I've been recreating Copycat recipes since 1995. Today, we're making Logan's Roadhouse fried mushrooms, so you can make restaurant-worthy crispy fried mushrooms at home. I'm going to walk you through that secret to make that perfect coating that stays put. Before we dive in, I want to give a special shout out to all of you who've been tagging me in your copycat creations on Instagram and Facebook lately. I've been seeing your versions of your recipes, and they bring me so much joy. If this is your first time tuning in, just know that every recipe I share has complete written instructions with step-by-step photos on copycat.com. You'll find the direct link in today's show notes. So you'll have all the measurements and detailed instructions at your fingertips whenever you're ready to cook. All right, so today we are talking about one of my favorite steakhouse appetizers, Logan's Roadhouse fried mushrooms. Now I know what you're thinking. Stephanie, I've tried making fried mushrooms at home before, and they were a soggy, disappointing mess. Trust me, I've been there. But after countless test batches in my kitchen, I've cracked the code to getting that perfect crispy coating that actually stays on the mushroom when you take a bite. The best part, this recipe uses simple, inexpensive ingredients that you probably have in your pantry. And when you make these at home, you're looking at spending about a quarter of what you pay for these in a restaurant. That's a pretty good deal for feeding a family or entertaining friends on a budget. Now let's talk about the star of our show, the humble button mushroom. They're usually the most affordable variety in the grocery store, which is great news for our wallets. I recommend choosing ones that are firmed with tightly closed caps. And here's a money-saving tip. Some folks insist upon wiping them with a damp paper towel to prevent them from absorbing water. But between us, if your mushrooms are particularly dirty, a quick rinse won't hurt them as long as you dry them thoroughly afterward. Just don't soak them. The magic of this recipe lies in the double-dredge technique and the buttermilk. If you've ever wondered why fried foods have that perfect coating, it's often because they use this method. First, we'll coat the mushrooms in seasoned flour, then we'll dip them in buttermilk, then back into the flour again, and then this creates that crispy layer. This creates wonderful crispy layers that seal in the moisture. Now, speaking of buttermilk, it's the secret weapon in this recipe. The slight tanginess adds flavor, while the thickness helps the coating adhere even better. If you don't have buttermilk on hand, no worries. You can make a quick substitute by adding a tablespoon of lemon juice or white vinegar to a cup of regular milk and letting it sit for about 5 minutes. Another thing you can do is you can buy powdered buttermilk, because I know we don't always need buttermilk. Now, I'll also share a recipe for how to make your own dry ranch mix that uses dry buttermilk, so you'll have another way to use it if you decide to get it. For those of you with dietary restrictions, I've heard from listeners who successfully have made this recipe gluten-free by substituting all-purpose flour with measure-for-measure gluten-free flour blend. One listener who's lactose intolerant told me that she used oat milk with a tablespoon of lemon juice instead of buttermilk, and she said the results were delicious. Now let's talk about frying. I know many of you want to avoid deep frying at home, either because of the mess or the calories, but for authentic Logan's Roadhouse fried mushrooms, there's really no substitute for that golden crispy coating that you get from proper frying. That said, I've had several listeners report good results using an air fryer after spraying the coated mushrooms with a little bit of cooking oil. The texture will not be identical, but it's a decent compromise if you're watching your calories. If you decide to fry, remember that the temperature is crucial. Too hot, the coating burns before the mushrooms cook through. Too cool, the mushrooms absorb too much oil and become greasy. Aim for 350 degrees Fahrenheit and use a thermometer if you don't have a fryer with temperature control. One of my favorite things about this recipe is how customizable it is. If you wanted to have a little kick, you could add some cayenne pepper to your flour, or if you love garlic, throw in a little bit of garlic powder. I've even had listeners who've added a bit of Parmesan cheese to the flour for an extra flavor boost. Now, let's not forget about the dipping sauces. At Logan's, they typically serve these with ranch dressing, but don't stop there. You could serve this with a horseradish sauce like Arby's, horsey sauce, marinara, a spicy tomato, or even a honey mustard dip will all work beautifully. One listener told me she serves these with a homemade blue cheese dressing, and her family absolutely adores them. Now, if you're making these for a party or a family gathering, here's a little time-saving tip. You can prepare the flour and the buttermilk dip ahead of time and even clean and trim your mushrooms. But I don't recommend coating the mushrooms until you're ready to fry. The longer they sit in the coating, the more likely it is they will get soggy. I've had so many wonderful messages from listeners about this recipe. Jane from Ohio wrote to tell me that the mushrooms converted her mushroom-hating husband into a fan. And Mike from Texas told me that these have become a mandatory appetizer for his family's game night. Now, one thing to keep in mind that these mushrooms are at their absolute best when they're fresh from the fryer. But if you do have any leftovers, don't toss them in the microwave. That's one ticket to Soggyville. Instead, reheat them in a 375-degree oven or an air fryer for a few minutes to crisp them back up. And here's one last money-saving tip here. If you enjoy fried foods but hate wasting oil, strain your cooled oil through a fine mesh sieve with a coffee filter, and then you can reuse it a couple more times. Just store it in an airtight container in a cool, dark place. Well, there you have it, folks. The secrets to making Logan's Roadhouse fried mushrooms that are crispy, delicious, and they won't break the bank. Remember, you can get the complete recipe either on the blog at copycat.com or you can click the show notes on this podcast. I'd love to hear how this recipe turns out for you and any creative twists that you put on it. Until then, this is Stephanie Manley from Copycat.com, helping you bring the restaurant experience at home. Why go out when you can make it at home?